I'm Alan Abbey of the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, and welcome to Struggling with the Israeli-Palestinian Issue, our latest video lecture series. This episode features Rabbi Dr. Donniel Hartman, co-director of the Shalom Hartman Institute. Other speakers in our series include Dori Gold, former Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, and Jessica Montel, executive director of B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights group.
This is the third part of a series of different perspectives on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And what I would like to do is try to contextualize what I believe to be the majority of opinion in Israeli society. In doing this contextualization, I do not intend at all to get into a who's right, who's wrong debate. If I would say, if any observation on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict over the last 30, 40 years, one of the greatest causes of its ineffectiveness and tragedy is the preponderance of a debate as to who's right and who's wrong. With you, I'd like to do something completely different. Like if I didn't know you, and if a Jew and a rabbi and Israeli was invited to speak to a group of Christian leadership of your prominence, I would be very inclined to make the case for Israel. That would be my duty. And the people who would prep me for that evening would be saying, well, you have to realize what they hear all the time. So they're not getting the Israeli side. Please give them the Israeli side. What we did, however, in this conference are a few things. Number one, we've given you many Israeli sides. That was our intent. Our intent of this whole seminar was to invite you into an Israeli discussion, a Jewish discussion. And just as we looked at the texts and saw that there were debates, so too there are debates within Israeli society. And our job to you was to bring all those sides. But there was a particular purpose for doing so. And that is that the hope that we would reach a different level of conversation with you, in which my job tonight and in general is not to attempt to shape your particular position on what you believe ought to be done or ought not to be done, on who you believe is right and who you believe is wrong. That's not, in other words, I'm not a member of the foreign ministry. I'm an educator. The perspective of my conversation tonight is that I'm speaking to friends. And as such, friends who I might disagree with. Friends who might have a radical position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, so radical as to be represented by numerous parties in the Knesset. You might even have such a position.
And two parties.
You might even be able to say, yes, some of my best friends in Israel hold such a position. You might even reach that point. But I'm at another, my aim tonight is different. My aim tonight is to try to help you, I believe, understand what is happening and what has happened in Israeli society over the last 10 years or so that you could understand this people, and if you are friends, friendship is not tested or measured by whether you agree or disagree. For as you know already, in this country, none of us disagree. And so by definition, almost any policy you will take can be part of the Israeli political discourse. But rather, if you want to be helpful, if you want, as friends, to move this area into another place, then understanding where Israelis are will help you talk to them and work with them. My remarks, I believe, represent the vast majority of Israelis. And they are, as well, just for the sake of honesty in advertising, they also represent my own opinion. I'm not a voice for somebody who's not at the table. I am somebody who lives in this country and as a profession watches people, hears people, and measures what is happening in a country. And so I do believe that what I will represent is also a predominant position in this country. One that as friends, you have to take into account. More than that, you have to find a way to hear. Not to the sense that you will agree, maybe you will, but that the conversation will be able to take place. There are three central events which have shaped the political position of the majority of Israelis today in 2008. Those three central events were the Oslo Accord and the Israeli perception of it being rejected by the Palestinians. The second is the unilateral disengagement from Gaza and its aftermath. And the third is the war in Lebanon. Each one today, if you want to understand an Israeli, prior to this, 67 and 73 defined the Israeli consciousness. Today, 67, 73, first, those are history long, long gone in the Israeli discourse and in the Israeli narrative regarding the Palestinians. What is shaping our political understanding? The first is Oslo. And as I said, the Israeli perception of its rejection by the Palestinian leadership and by the Palestinian population. Oslo had a profound impact on Israeli society and changed it. Oslo, by which I mean the signing of Oslo, and ultimately the handshake in the Rose Garden. I remember the moment when the handshake, and you have to realize when the handshake with Arafat occurred, I remember at that time turning to my wife and saying to her, Adina, I just forgave him. I have forgiven him. A person who killed many of my people, who it was illegal for me to have a conversation with. At that moment, I said I forgave him. And by and large, one of the things you have to understand is Oslo, in its first stage, transformed Israeli society. Israelis won. In masses, and by in masses and Israelis we're talking about over 75%. And in a country where we can't agree on anything, 75% majority is almost messianic. Messianic. We can't even agree. I don't think 75% agree on the weather. But post-Oslo, 75% of the country agreed, first, that land for peace is and must be the policy of the State of Israel. That the war of 67 and its bounty has now come to an end. And that for the sake of peace, Judea and Samaria, the holiness of these lands and our history, which is connected to it, is secondary to our future. 2, there was a deep and fundamental acceptance of what Menachem Begin had signed in the first Camp David Accord, but he just wrote the words. And that is that there was a deep acceptance of the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people to their own homeland. And that the future of the Middle East must entail two countries living side by side between the Jordan and the Mediterranean. across the board in Israeli society. By the way, till today. The third, and this is the most significant as a result of Oslo, is that Israelis began to believe that peace is not simply a dream, but in fact can be a reality. We taste it. I remember when I made Aliyah in 1971 as a 13-year-old, my parents were convinced that I would not have to serve in the army. Oh, by the time Donniel will be in the army, it's 5 years away. That's a lifetime. Peace will come to the land. When I came back in 95, my son was then 6. I really believed that he would not be in harm's way. And I believed that I would be able to offer my son a life that I did not have. A life in which war is not a fundamental reality of his existence, and in one in which he does not have to go to battle, endanger his life, lose his friends, and experience, as anybody who's been in battle, a life-shattering and transforming experience which you never overcome. You compensate. You can compensate. I sort of control my tick. I don't drool that often. But fundamentally, when you go to war, you're not the same person. You're not the same person. When you encounter death at that proximity, that is not a normal feature of life. It transforms you. I tasted for my son a better life. I was there. And when I came back it's like I was coming back. It's okay. He's not going to have to experience what I experienced. He won't have to. And if he falls in love, his wife won't have to be worried. Like my sister was worried. His family, we're not going to experience anymore what it means to lose somebody. We're not going to. That's part of the past. And while the language of peace is spoken about throughout the Jewish tradition, it's like this. It was messianic. After Oslo, while we didn't think we were living in the end of days, from the perspective of peace, we felt that aspect of normalcy, that which every single one of you takes for granted, I began to feel I could take it for granted too. Within that context, we basically, as I said to you, when I said I forgave Yasser Arafat, the basic move in Israeli society was, I'm not going to continue anymore calculating. We're going to stop counting how many you killed as distinct from how many I killed. We're going to stop counting who did more atrocities to the next. Or, I love this one, who started? That's a good one. You started. The cycle, you started. No, it doesn't matter anymore. Was I justified in taking 67? Was in the lands? Was I not justified? Doesn't matter. Should I? Shouldn't I? What did I do in the meantime? How much did Palestinians suffer? How much did Israelis suffer? All of the above. You wanna count? Enjoy. Counting is in the past. We are now talking about a new future for us and our children. That was the fundamental operating principle and understanding of Israelis. In light of that, it is possible to understand the deep, deep depression that took place when Oslo ultimately led to an intifada, to the second intifada. Whether Sharon should have gone onto the Temple Mount, should not have gone onto the Temple Mount, who cares? The intifada was not the response that we Israelis thought was the appropriate one when we agreed in Camp David to giving back 90% of the West Bank, 90% of the West Bank, dismantling 80 to 90% of the settlements. The extra 10% would be given in parallel parcels of land. Jerusalem would be divided. All we insisted on, and this is the Jewish compromise, we would own the ground under the Temple Mount. We accepted that we won't go on top the temple. Well, all we want is to say, our roots are here too. Could you accept that we had a past here? I accept that right now, for whatever reason, you are the present and the future. You know, when whose Messiah comes, that, you know, let them work that one out. We all look like, what is this? Who cares? If Jesus comes as the Messiah, I'll become a Christian. And if a Jewish Messiah comes, you're not going to remain Christian. You're going to join my club. You know? But the reality is that the Jewish tradition, we have messiahs who tarry. So, that's what we do. You have to realize the statement of faith of the Messiah in the Jewish tradition is, Ani ma'amin b'viyat HaMashiach, v'afal pi sheyitma hamea in kol zeh achakelo. That was for the Hebrew speakers. I believe in the coming of the Messiah, and even though he will tarry, I will still await him. In other words, in the statement of faith of the Jewish people, our Messiah is a tarrying Messiah. And usually the Messiah who comes is a false Messiah. So we could leave that. Unfortunately, maybe we will one day return. We accept that our holiest site will be forbidden for us to pray there. It might even be forbidden for us to ever go up there. We'll stay down at the Kotel. And if any of you ever went up on the Temple Mount, the Kotel's small change. It's borderline pathetic. It's like a slum compared to the Temple Mount. Temple Mount's beautiful. We accepted you get the Temple Mount. Could you just accept that we were once here, and therefore we theoretically own the ground under the temple? That's all we wanted. We'll divide Jerusalem. We thought that such an offering, maybe it wasn't perfect. Maybe you might have suspected how sincere we were. I'm sure we all know, and again, I want to be precise. I'm not getting into who was right and who was wrong. I know all of life is a Rashamon. All I want to tell you is what Israelis felt. Regardless of what you felt, should Arafat have been pushed by Barak into the room? Did that hurt his feelings in that famous scene? You know, with Clinton and Barak pushing Arafat in. Was his feelings, could he have made peace? Maybe he couldn't because of, whatever it is, I'm sure there is a more than accurate, more than adequate Palestinian counter-narrative. From the Israeli perspective, at worst what it should have led to was, this is phenomenal, let's talk a little more. The response, however, was the murdering of our children. The response was the taking away from our children their childhood. I had just moved back to Israel. My daughter's best friend, she was 14, was blown up in front of a toy store on Rehov Ben Yehuda. Her best friend. The person believed that a toy store was a strategic target. My other daughter, younger, learned that her teacher, who had just left a week earlier on a maternity leave because she was about to deliver, was murdered. She discovered this on television. As she's watching, they shot her husband. She came out of her house to protect her husband. And in her 2 weeks before she's about to deliver, she was murdered. My daughter discovers this on television. Abba, is that my teacher? No, don't be silly. And I changed the channel. And she goes to school the next day. They didn't have childhoods. My children didn't have it. They didn't. From an aspiration that you were going to give your kids something different, we felt that our dream was shattered and taken away from us. A consequence of that was not so much fear, but a deep disdain. And I want you to understand this if you want to understand Israelis. The Second Intifada created a deep and profound disdain and hostility and anger towards Palestinians and Palestinian leadership in Israeli society. At that moment, the left wing ceased to exist in Israeli political life. Disappeared. I used to be part of the left wing. I used to give lectures about Palestinian rights. I used to speak about how all human beings are created in the image of God. That conversation ceased. Still carried on by very small, statistically insignificant members of Israeli society. Maybe they are the best of us, but they are on the fringe of Israeli society. The policies of B'Tselem, which used to be the policies of mainstream centrist and left-wing Israelis, who were concerned about the moral corruption and about the evil being perpetrated on Palestinians, ceased to be a concern in Israeli society. From the perspective of Israelis, Palestinians ceased to earn the right of our moral concern. A great tragedy, but a reality. And still today, it is impossible to speak about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in moral categories to the vast majority of Israelis. The most you can do, if you want to speak about the Palestinian conflict, is to speak about the demographic time bomb, that if we want to be a Jewish democratic state, we can't be democratic and maintain control over 4 or 5 million Palestinians. It has nothing to do with their rights. It's an internal Jewish discussion. And this is center and left I'm speaking about now. There's demographics, or we can speak about larger geopolitical concerns such as Syria and Iran, in which some compromise with Palestinians might be necessary, not for their own sake. I want you to understand, for the vast majority of Israelis, the vast majority of Palestinians are morally insignificant others today. They lost that right. When you went after my kids, when you didn't go after my kids in the midst of despair, you went after my kids after we were this close to ending the conflict. We were this close. When that's what you did, when you believed bombing buses, when you felt that that was a legitimate military excursion, we Israelis did cease to believe that we are in a normal human discourse. It is not simply the enemy. I want you to understand, I'm not talking about a one-on-one moment. A soldier who acts against the law and attacks a Palestinian unjustly will be brought to trial. But there is no largesse of spirit. There's no compassion anymore. We used to have a lot of compassion for the Palestinians. Tremendous amount. We felt that the settler movement, we felt that the occupation was an unjust reality that had to come to an end. And that I cannot come home unless the Palestinians come home. There is no concern for the Palestinian population in Israeli society today. I need you to hear it, and I need you to understand it. That's the change in Oslo. Stage 2. The disengagement from Gaza and its aftermath. If the fundamental operating principle of Israelis is that we are talking to a people and a leadership which doesn't share fundamental moral values and principles, is not in the same discourse that we're in. Negotiations, I want you to say, are now impossible. They have no future. We tried. What more could we possibly offer? This is an Israeli narrative. What more could we possibly do? 90%? That's not bad. Jerusalem, not bad. Oh, you speak about the return of the refugees? That's the one that confuses us the most. We thought that when you signed the Oslo Accord, you were signing a two-state solution. How could you sign a two-state solution and expect and claim that you hadn't yet given up a notion of the right of return of 5 million Palestinians to Israel? I thought when you signed it, you said there were injustices, we're moving onwards. You mean you said Israel has a right to exist, that's what I signed, but what I really meant was that I'm going to stop trying to destroy you militarily and I'm just going to destroy you demographically? That's what you meant? This is what Israelis, we started, what's going on here? I can't negotiate. If that's what you mean, how could I negotiate with you? You speak to us about peace, yet you never once changed your curriculum in your schools. Once. You were still training your children from age 5 that we were a blood-sucking enemy that should be killed. You didn't change your curriculum in your schools once. What do we do? I can't negotiate because this community does not seem to be committed to a peace process. The only way we could move forward is this new panacea. It's called unilateral withdrawal. And it was very enticing because it was the first hope that we can have. Because what happens if you really want to dance and you discover that there's no one who wants to dance with you? You learn how to dance alone. And it's not so bad. And that's the myth of unilateral withdrawal. I don't have to talk to Palestinians. I could achieve the parallel of an Oslo Accord without ever having to talk. Because even if I talk, they won't keep. And even if they claim to keep, they'll break. So you know what? I'm going to stop talking. Unilatericity becomes the new code word, which gave us all hope. Oh, wow. We could move forward. And I remember feeling it, because you know what happened? My son's getting older. And now he's not 6 anymore. Now he's 16. I have 2 years to make sure that he doesn't have to serve in Gaza. I have 2 years left. That's it. Unilateral. Again, we don't speak about it because the Palestinians deserve a country. There is no compassion towards the Palestinians. We speak about the demographic time bomb. We speak about the fact that we don't want our soldiers serving in Gaza. And most significantly, behind the unilateral withdrawal is the notion that if we could put into play a peaceful life, that process will be contagious. That was the hope of unilateral withdrawal. Don't they want for their kids what we want for our kids? Of course they do. They must be prisoners. You know what we're going to do? We're going to become behaviorists. We're not going to go back and ask when your mother stopped breastfeeding you and how your father looked at you when you were in the bathtub. We're not going to get into that discussion. What we're going to do is we're going to be behaviorists. We're just going to put in play a different reality. A reality in which we give you complete and total control over your space. We're gone. Wouldn't you you say you want independence. I know it's not being negotiated and I know it's not respectful, but frankly, we don't respect you right now. But we're going to leave. You know what we're going to do? We're also going to dismantle all of our settlements. And you're going to see it. You're going to see the fight. You're going to see Jews tearing down buildings. And you know what? We're going to leave. We even make a conscious decision. We're going to leave the infrastructure for you as a sign of goodwill. We're also going to leave our synagogues, by the way. We're going to leave the synagogues. An interesting test. Let's see, will peace sprout forth? Will the natural instinct of the human being to want better for their children. Isn't that going to be contagious? Isn't that going to define your reality? Let's see. And we withdraw. We withdrew in the midst of great debate, but we also withdrew with great hope that maybe we would create through this withdrawal a tipping point in Israeli society, in Palestinian society. The Israeli narrative was told, Oslo changed Israelis. No parallel change took place in the Palestinian as a result of Oslo. They were still stuck in pre-Oslo categories. And their leadership did not institute educational, public relational types of endeavors to move them away from their pre-Oslo language. So this would be a new thing. We're going to push it. What more? There's not going to be any settlers, no roadblocks, no Jews, no Israeli army, nothing. Of course, Gaza is still a prison. But here I'm offering you an opportunity. If you use this right, Judea and Samaria is around the corner. It's there. It doesn't create, or it doesn't require a huge foresight to say, you know what? This was good. Let's give it a year. Do you know what? Let's give it 6 months. You know what? Let's give it a week. Let's see. Maybe goodwill will give birth to goodwill. Instead, the first thing that we encounter is a pillaging and tearing down of our synagogues. First thing that we see, hordes, masses descend on the settlements, and they vandalize and desecrate the synagogues. And we look and say, who are these people? Okay, maybe they had such pent-up anger. Okay, we'll let it go. Then the $3 billion infrastructure which Wolfowitz sets up, basically creating an industrial independence and jobs for Palestinians, that gets torn and destroyed. One second, what's going on here? Where's the leadership? Why are they destroying their future? And we're looking again. Who is this? Why aren't they responding? And then we receive, instead of quiet, instead of I understand what's the next stage, we receive a constant, unending barrage of Qassam rockets on our cities. Unending. In addition, instead of a Palestinian Authority, the population kicks out the Palestinian Authority, votes in Hamas, who declares that the destruction of Israel is not simply a political aim, but it's a religious aim. And the conflict moves from being a political conflict to being a religious one between Judaism and Islam. Something that Jews refrained from doing since 48. And you should know, there are people within the Christian community who are engaged in a war against Islam. Primarily, there is a war for control of certain areas of the world, and Christianity is not winning when it is confronting Islam. We Jews are not part of that war. We never wanted it. I don't want it. I could agree that we have a conflict with Palestinians. We don't have a conflict with Islam. We don't have any fantasy of world control. Even if we did, it would be irrelevant, so we don't have one. So therefore, we changed our fantasy very early on. We don't have one. All we want to do is control our space. Your space, it's not for me. I have no agenda for the world. We don't have a message. I don't have the good word for anybody. All we have is a word for Jews. And this is fundamental Jewish policy. But now we turned around and said, unilateral withdrawal did not change the Palestinian response to our synagogues. It wasn't even people. Is there anything holy? Did not create a desire to create an infrastructure for themselves which will enable a future. produced constant Qassam rockets, which means that the government is either interested or not able to control its population. And if that's the case, what should we do? And it's not the death. We're not going to count how many of mine died as distinct from how many yours. If constantly this is what's happening, that means you are basically someone who we can't trust. Your population is not committed to peace, and your leadership are not committed to instituting security along internationally accepted borders. And then you theologize the conflict, and now we have a language that not only is Israel a political liability, but Israel is but that Israel is a representation of a enemy of Islam, and Hamas doctrine, official Hamas doctrine, innovates and states that it is forbidden under Sharia for a Jew to live in the state in the Middle East, for Israel, not Mecca and Medina. Under Mecca and Medina, there are hadith which speak about who is allowed and who is not allowed. Under a Hamas doctrine, we are not allowed to be here. And now, how do we function in this environment? What does this do to Israelis? I want you to understand this is step 2 after step 1. We now are faced with in our narrative, with a very, very difficult moment in Israeli society, in which if after the first step, the second intifada, there was a disdain and anger towards Palestinians which caused a deep break vis-a-vis our concern and compassion, and a suspension of all moral discussion and any discussion about rights of Palestinians, gone from Israeli political life. In the second stage, the Palestinian response to the unilateral withdrawal was a relinquishing of any notion that there's something that we could do to change our future here. There is a deep suspicion prevalent in Israeli society whether we can help ourselves anymore, whether there's anything that we can do. The fundamental operating policy is, it's nothing that we can do. We have to look out for ourselves. Whatever we need to do to look out for ourselves is legitimate, because their ultimate desire is to want us dead. And in that environment, the only thing that I have to concern myself with is what could stop them from killing me. You think Israelis are going to have a moral debate about the fence? You think we're going to debate the fence? When from the Israeli perspective, the only purpose of the fence is, you don't have a right to kill me. I have to do whatever I need to do to stop you from killing me. Do you know what? Roadblocks stink. Roadblocks are immoral. You know what? Blowing up houses, wrong. All of it. I don't care. I will do anything to keep my kids alive. When you're ready to act as a human being, give me a call. Otherwise, I am going to have to learn how to live. Because in the Jewish tradition, living is a value unto itself. Under Jewish law, if somebody comes to you and says, violate Jewish law, otherwise I'm going to kill you, you are obligated to violate Jewish law. If you choose death, if you choose martyrdom, you are guilty of murder. I want you to understand, you are guilty of murder. We don't remember any of our martyrs. You want to do a little survey? Walk around in the streets tomorrow. The greatest dyer in Jewish history, in Israeli history, is Elazar ben Yair, who led the Masada. Go ask an Israeli, who led the revolt in Masada? Nobody knows his name. How do you think he feels? No one knows his name. Martyrdom might be a necessary choice, but it is a violation in general of the core value of life. Life is a gift of God, and with the exception of three things and three things only, you have to choose life. You only choose death if somebody says to you, worship idols, kill somebody, or commit adultery. Those three alone are considered, if you save your life by doing them, you've created a life not worth living. This is a country which celebrates life, and we're going to do anything we need to do to live. Am I sure that knocking down a house of a terrorist is going to be helpful? No. But frankly, I don't know what's going to be. I'm scrambling. They're targeting my kids. That's what they're doing. And if they're targeting my kids, I'm not going to kill their kids. But maybe the families, this is our hope, maybe there's going to be somebody who's going to actually say to them, don't do this. Because you know what we see on television after every time somebody martyrs themselves? A mother getting up and saying, I wish I had 12 more sons. This is what we hear. Does she mean it? Is she manipulated? All of it is possible. In this neighborhood, this is what we're hearing. What we heard from the unilateral withdrawal, which, again, the vast majority of Israelis supported, is that when we show weakness, or when we compromise, in return, we get death. And that a notion of offering Palestinians a better future is interpreted by them as weakness. And right now, the vast majority of Israelis have no political horizon when it comes to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. We don't know what we should do. Just don't know what to do. And so we're treading water. Third central moment is the war in Lebanon. The significant moment in the war in Lebanon is not the missile attacks, even though they're significant. And it makes Israelis realize that if Qassam rockets are being fired from Gaza, if we do a similar move in Judea and Samaria, all of Israel is covered. What would happen to the Israeli economy if one mortar shell is fired at Ben Gurion Airport, which is maybe 5 kilometers away from Ramallah? That's all. We have a 12-mile strip. Qassam rockets could go 6. Some of them can now go 12. You don't have to hit Tel Aviv. You don't even have to cause major casualties. 1 on Ben Gurion Airport. All tourism ceases. The Israeli economy goes into a spiral. The country's bankrupt, and we can close up shop. 1. You wouldn't come here. No one's here. Financially, we go bankrupt. The war in Lebanon showed us the vulnerability of this country to missile attack. But something much deeper happened in the war in Lebanon, which I need you also to understand. Since 1948, we have all been brought up under the myth that the army has a solution for all of our security concerns. It's a standard Israeli myth. Tzahal yeda ma lahagiv, goes the line. The army will know what to do. And it really is almost humorous, because this is, as the Qassams were falling, don't worry, we're going to respond. When? Soon. Tzahal knows what to do. It will soon. And they sort of carried this on. And then we come to Lebanon. And what happened is that the army did not know what to do. One of the reasons why the army did not know what to do is, and here is another window into Israeli society, the perspective of the Israeli citizen is that military casualties are unacceptable. We have a greater tolerance for civilian casualties than we have for military casualties. Try being a head of government using an army in which casualties are unacceptable. Try running a war that way, and now you'll be sitting in Ehud Olmert's position. And the reason why is because everybody has their kid. It's not someone else. It's not someone else's army. It's my kids. The country, the job of the citizen and of the civilian is to protect the army. Every soldier has a cell phone, calls home daily. If a soldier does not call home daily, you have his commander's number, cell phone, and you call his commander, and the soldier will be called to his commanding officer wanting to know, how come you didn't speak to your mother today? In basic training, there is 15 minutes a day allocated for calling home. And as I said, you come home at worst every 3 weeks. At the worst. And very often on the weeks that you don't come home, if your family's not Orthodox, the base is open for family visitors. This is you have to realize, camp here in Israel, overnight camp, the longest one that exists is 6 days. And there's visiting day in the middle. I swear, there's visiting. I don't know what it is. Is it from the time when we left the desert and God never fed, when we left Egypt and God always fed us the day after we were hungry? Never gave us food the day first. We had to be first. Since then, we Jews have food obsessions. We have issues. We're feeding. We're worried. What's my kid going to do? You should see the packages that I send my kid. Food. It's a whole thing going on. The biggest critique of the Israeli army in the war in Lebanon is that soldiers didn't have enough food. But what happened was the great difficulty, because this is a break in Israeli society. When our army couldn't stop the missiles from dropping, the notion that our army has a solution for every danger was shattered in Israeli society. And right now, this is a society scrambling to reclaim that myth. Because frankly, when you're 6-7 million people in this neighborhood, you need myths of stability to get through the day. Are we lying to ourselves? It's not your business. If that's what helps me get through the day, that's what's going to help me do. I need that myth. When denial, then I'm walking around, when you have a guy like Ahmadinejad using this language, and or Nasrallah, speaking openly, that my desire is to wipe you off the face of the earth. My desire is not to divide Jerusalem. My desire is to have you dead. My desire is that the state of Israel as an independent state ceases to exist. You have more than enough justification to feel paranoid. And in that environment, we need something that gives us a stability. And our army gave it to us for many, many years, and it doesn't give it to us right now. If you add the first two transformations to the third, despite the immense military apparatus and power which is at the beck and call of Israeli society, Israeli citizens do not feel secure right now. Compromise comes from a position of power. Israelis do not feel powerful right now. Where does that lead us? And some thoughts on as to the future, and then if there's any questions or comments. What won't work? When we hear a language of, we have to hurry and finish this up by the end of 2008, we frankly don't even know what you're talking about. Indianapolis was not even covered in the Israeli news. Annapolis was not even covered, barely covered. It was a non-event. Because we knew it was, what are you talking about? It's a fraud. I know, we have a real problem here. Are you ready to get serious? You think you're going to give a deadline? More than that. You think you're going to give an imposed solution? So let's say you force us to leave the West Bank. Let's say you force, whatever, you put pressure, you do whatever you need. Where does that lead us? From the Israeli perspective, you know where it leaves us? In death. That's all you've done. You haven't solved anything. I have a neighbor who wants to be dead. This is what I have heard. This is where I am right now. With all my power, I believe I could survive. I believe my enemy could hurt me. My enemy might even be able to kill some of me. But the job of my country is to make sure that they can't destroy me. And you're now talking about peace? What are you talking about? What world are you living in? When you do BDS, DBSs, SEBs, ich weiß nicht what you want to call it. What do we hear? We don't get you. We don't even understand you. What do you think the problem is? Ace opened a store in Judea, in Ma'ale Adumim, and you think if you're going to boycott Ace, you're even contributing? What are you talking about? I'm ready to give back the settlements. Didn't you hear me? I'm ready. And in any event, in the Camp David, Ma'ale Adumim wasn't being returned. There were 3 major settlement blocks, which only take up 10% of the land. And they have 80% of the settlers, which are contiguous and do not break and will not necessarily break up the West Bank, which were kept under Israeli rule. That's where it is. No one's putting an Ace hardware store in Hebron. It was in Ma'ale Adumim with 50,000 citizens. What do you think, that you're going to just move these 50,000 people? It's not going to happen. The 8,000 settlers who were taken out of Gaza still, after 3 years, don't even have a home yet. After 3 years, were not resettled. Have an unemployment rate 4 times that of Israeli society. Have a mortality rate over 5 years younger than the rest of Israeli society. You think you're going to move? You think you're going to come down and say, who are you talking to? You're taking one of the most complex tragedies in history, and you think you're going to now put a little influence on Caterpillar, and what? Is it about making you feel good, or is it about doing something good? If you want to do something good, what we need to do, and here I want to offer some hope, within a very, very difficult context. What do we need? And here, again, I'm saying this clearly. I'm not here negotiating, and I know that I want to hear a list of what the Palestinians need. But I'm not here, I'm asking, I want you to understand where Israelis are. 1. Israelis need to be convinced that peace is a Palestinian value. Right now, we don't believe it. We need to be reconvinced. 2, we need to be convinced that there is a leadership and a population who want to coexist with us and who are not religious fundamentalists. Because if it is religious fundamentalists, there is no possibility of dialogue and hope for a future. We've seen political leaders who use their people, rob them, pillage them, but who don't lead them. At present, we see a Palestinian leadership which is morally and politically outstanding, completely powerless and impotent to deliver anything. We see a Palestinian society which we're not sure is functioning like a people. In fact, it seems to be functioning as local tribes and neighborhoods. in which the agenda of the northern section of Jenin does not think about what the western neighborhood of Ramallah, let alone of Jenin, let alone of Ramallah, is even concerned about. The Erez checkpoint was shelled a few weeks ago. You have to realize, we are that which we're, according to the world, our responsibility is to feed and to deliver oil and electricity to the west, to Gaza. It gets bombed. Our people who man it are getting killed. This is, I want you to understand, this is what and that's considered just fine. A few weeks ago it was bombed because once it was about to be opened and seed plants, it was about to be delivered, the person who had the seed concession in Gaza felt that the prices would go down, so he bombed the Erez shell across it. Not Hamas, not Islamic Jihad. What's my issue? We're not sure there's a centralized government capable of leading and delivering. We need to know that there's a central, powerful government which is not religiously fundamentalist. And then finally, after these two, we need to again become a people who are concerned about Palestinian human rights. We have to become a people which learns how to care and have compassion for them again. These are the fundamental challenges that we face today. To achieve these, we need very slow processes of trust building. We don't need dramatic solutions, which we know are a quicksand. They have no future. They will continue to be interpreted by Palestinians in the eyes of Israelis as weakness, as grounds to continue to ask for more. If we got this, then if we just do a little more, we'll get more, regardless of what it is. We can get more and more and more. The fundamental position of Israelis is that Palestinians believe that they could break our spirit. Peace requires our spirit to be intact, our spirit to be comfortable, our spirit to be trustworthy again. See, I believe, not because of reality, not because of anything that I've seen, but I believe that peace is possible because that's the type of world I want to live in. Am I naive? Yes. And when people call me naive, my response is, thank you. That's my response. Thank you. I work on it. I believe being naive is a value. Because naive means that I constantly set for myself a goal which transcends empirical reality, and I don't allow empirical reality to define me. I try to define empirical reality. But at the same time, I don't want to commit suicide. Don't try to simplify this conflict by thinking you're going to force one person's hand. It's not going to happen. And even if it gives you short-term high, in the end of the day, it's destructive in this neighborhood. Israelis and Palestinians have to be convinced that what the world wants from them is that what we want right now is that each side has to convince the other that you're serious. This is what do I want from you? I don't want a solution yet. You're not ready. Israelis, what could you do? Let's listen to a Palestinian narrative of shame, of degradation, of pain, of homelessness. Let's hear it. And let's hear, what could I do to help? If the only thing that I could do to help is die, then I'll wait another generation like God in the desert. You want me to wait? I'll wait. I'm stiff-necked. I will wait till the end of days. I'm a people which waited 2,000 years to come back to Jerusalem. I want you to understand something. We're not a people that gives up. I can wait. And every generation I'm going to knock on the door and I'm going to say, what could I do to help? I want concrete, specific, non-messianic, not end of days suggestions. Donniel, I understand your security concerns. I believe that 200 out of the 300 checkpoints should be removed. I say, okay, I hear you. I have a little problem right now, and that is that I haven't seen you arrest a single terrorist yet. I haven't seen you disarm one person. One. Show me that you are actually concerned. More than that. You know what? Show me that the person who you arrested, who killed somebody, you actually kept in jail more than 2 weeks for murdering me. Show me. Who's going to start? You know what? No problem. I understand we can get into that game. Who comes first? I'll get rid of 20. Now keep them in jail. Keep those who kill me in jail. And you know what? For every 3 months that you keep them in jail, and for every neighborhood that you clean out of weapons, and don't give me this crap, and excuse my French, that it's illegal to walk around with guns in public. If you have terrorist organizations in your midst, and you have a Yasser Arafat policy of arming everybody so that nobody could rule, so that you would rule, if you don't combat that, you know what? Every neighborhood, you clean out a neighborhood and keep it that way for a month, another 10 checkpoints. I accept it. I accept immediately. I have to do things. Tell me. And I'm ready to do them. And the minute there is a Palestinian leader who speaks in this language, I promise you, you will find an Israeli leader who is willing to go further than it. This is not a promise based on fantasy. In fact, since the formation of the state, there has not been one single peace proposal put forth to the Israeli population which has not been accepted by the population and by the Israeli government. Not one. Ever. Ever. Speak to me. Your task, then, is to help us not solve the problem. I wish we were there. We're not there. You're going to have to realize that it might take another decade or two. Let's concentrate not on myths, not on political statements, but on real work. Real work of bringing humanity and decency back to this neighborhood. And you do that by demanding that. Don't demand declarations. Demand decency. From Israelis too. Demand it. This is what we demand. I don't want concessions. I want moral greatness. Let that be the language. Stop talking about blame. Stop picking sides. And start challenging the people in the Middle East to incorporate certain core moral principles of humanity. And if we can't, then we deserve the reality which we're in. And every day, you know, one of the, and with this I'll conclude. When the temple was destroyed in the year 70, the Jews said next year in Jerusalem. In the year 71, the Jews said next year in Jerusalem. In the year 72, they said next year in Jerusalem. In the year 73, they said next year in Jerusalem. 74, 75, 76, 77. If I keep this up, you'll have a sense of what 2,000 years is. We are a people, this is who we are. We are a people whose spirit doesn't break. We are a people who are able to say next year in Jerusalem for close to 2,000 years. And it's because we said that we finally came back to Jerusalem. We need a new dream. We're back in Jerusalem. And we discovered that being in Jerusalem is great, but it's also a nightmare. We discovered that when we came back to Jerusalem, part of our doing that was at the expense of somebody else's rights. That's true. It was a tragedy. Absolutely correct. There is no doubt in my mind that injustice was done to Palestinians. None. What we need is all of us, instead of dreaming about controlling Jerusalem, we have to dream about living together. The rabbis ask this famous statement, which my father taught this to me many years ago, and it had a very deep impression on my life. The rabbis ask in this very humorous text, God, you're supposed to be a God of justice. How come you show so much favor on the Jews? It's kind of humorous because we're in the sewer pits of history, but we're talking, but at least in our language, maybe, we talk that way, maybe we'll actually feel that life is that way. And God says, I commanded the Jewish people in the Torah that when you eat and you're full, then you're supposed to give thanks to me. The blessing after a meal only comes when you're full. And God says, this people decided that when they eat the equivalent of an olive or an egg, they give thanks to me. How could I not show favor on such a people? The idea behind that is that to be a Jew is to be able to give thanks when you're still hungry. Even if you eat an olive or an egg and you're not full, you can still give thanks for something. The most important lesson that we have to teach all of us here in the Middle East, if we're going to reclaim a little bit of humanity, is that we have to give up our fantasies of victory and learn and educate our populations to be full from an olive and an egg. The reality of the Middle East is we're going to have to split the territory. It's not going to be all of anyone's. Nobody's going to get everything that they want. If you think that when you don't get everything, you're the victim, there is no future. If you know how to give thanks for an olive, then you're part of God's chosen people. That type of message, that type of political discourse, that type of educational challenge, that type of partnership is what we need from our friends. And if we get that, it still might take us 50 years. Unfortunately, it's possible. My grandchildren might have to go to the army. It's possible. But the test is not what will happen to my grandchildren. The test is whether we, as people of decency, are doing everything in our power to improve our reality here. That's our responsibility. And to do so, we need real friends. And I'm hoping that you, and I'm hoping that through you others, regardless of whether you think Israel is guilty, regardless of whether you think the Palestinians are more victims or they're guilty, that doesn't help me either. Hating the Palestinians doesn't get me anywhere either. You saying, you know what, the Palestinians, they're part of the axis of evil, doesn't do me any good. You're not my friend by hating them. Right now, we don't know how to move forward. We need real friends. And my hope is that you will be such friends. Thank you.